This video is all about chutney making. This is my autumn fruits chutney. It's one of my really great favourites, and it uses up all sorts of small amounts of produce either from your garden or that you've got left over. So it's a mixture, and I've got 2 kilos of fresh produce. Cooking apples, a squash or pumpkin. I've got a courgette that's really got a bit too big to be really sweet and delicious. I've got a few sticks of late rhubarb, and so that's 2 kilos altogether. I've got 1 kilo of onions and then 500 grams of sweet things. And what makes this chutney for me is the combination of crystallized ginger and dates. These are block dates, and then I've got some sultanas as well. Of course you could use raisins if that's what you've got, but actually I think sultanas are slightly nicer. And then 50 grams of salt and the vinegar and the sugar that we shall need to complete the chutney. Now, to stop you having to hang around, I'm just going to get this all chopped up and then we'll be ready to go. See you in a minute. Right, I've done lots of chopping, so into the pan where the majority of the apples are, I'm just going to shoot in the squash. Hopefully most of this is going in. Then the courgettes and the rhubarb. Now, my stalks of rhubarb weren't too thick. If you had end of season really thick stuff, cut it much finer. So, just a couple of things to show you. First of all, when you chop up the onions, it can be really annoying when you've got that sort of rot where the outer, some of the inner parts of the onion are rotting, because what's happened is the tops have started to rot before the onions themselves have been properly harvested. Do cut that out. That will not help the keeping qualities of your chutney. And having said that, when you're doing your onions, having topped and tailed them, you might feel inclined just to try and take off this papery skin, but do go a good layer deeper. And most onions are grown from sets. I said sets. And they do tend to keep the outer layer of the onion really quite tough. And if you don't remove that, quite often in your chutney, even after it's cooked, you will have that tough layer. So having done that, I'll just chop that up, ready to go. Oh, there was a little bit there that stuck to my knife, so just give that a chop. And then again, as I say, I just went through the length of the onion and then chopped across, and just keeping your fingers bent so that if your knife does slip, you're not going to chop your fingers off, because they're not very good in chutney either. Now, with the squash, I've peeled it. The best way to remove the seeds is with a spoon. And the butternut squash have changed shape over the last few years. They've actually bred them so that the neck of the squash is much longer and the seeds are just in the base. But they're still, little devils to get out. So with a spoon, that's the best way of doing it. Some people, dear viewer, will fry up the pumpkin seeds, not skins. And they're very tasty indeed, but with squash seeds, I haven't found that that's the same. So you can try, keeping a few for next year to grow your squash on from, but quite honestly, the best squashes are what we call F1s. So they're bred to not necessarily come, well, they won't necessarily come true to the squash that you've had. So you could find that, your butternut reverts and it's not quite the tasty or modern shaped squash that you were hoping for. These obviously will take that little bit longer to cook than some of the other vegetables in our chutney, so cut them up quite small. If you're using pumpkin instead of squash, that's much more watery and the pieces can be left that little bit bigger. Now I did keep just one piece of apple back to show you. There's no citrus in this chutney, and so inevitably the apples will start to go brown. But if you have this spotting as you prepare your apple, oh, it's so very, very annoying. But you do want to try and cut that out because it is the start of the fruit deteriorating. And, you know, sometimes you can see it on the skin, and in that case, you just don't want to buy that apple. But nevertheless, underneath, sometimes it's apparent as well. It's annoying, but in this world of zero waste, we're all trying not to, compost fruit and veg that could otherwise be eaten. And a lot of people do collect such stuff from supermarkets now and make chutneys with them. That's great, but eat it straight away. Don't try and keep it for months and months and months, because it will not be as good as making your chutney with the fresh produce. And in fact, it can go mouldy in the jar if you keep it any longer than a few months. And let me tell you, having judged chutneys where that has happened, it is the most revolting flavour. It's like eating mould, but not nice mould like in cheese. So any preserving, it's got to be good quality stuff. And let's just have a peek in the pan, and that gives you some idea of how delicious this is going to be. So I'll just chop up my dried fruits. Obviously the sultanas don't need chopping, but the dates and the ginger do. So, very bad planning, having all those brown things in a brown dish. But I'll just pop that in there and see you in a moment. So, there's the ginger and the dates chopped. Not too finely, but just a point. You see everything I've shushed into the pan, that's a technical culinary word, I've done with the back of my knife. And the reason for that is it just keeps your knife sharper for that little bit longer. So everything's in the pan now, and I'm going to add 50 grams of fine salt, a kilo of sugar. Now I'm using golden granulated today, Demerara, light muscovado, but the golden gran is also unrefined. So although it's a slightly finer sugar than Demerara, it's still got the molasses in it, and you're after that for the sweetness for the chutney. And then the 568 ml, crazy measurement, it's imperialism, it's a direct conversion from a pint of distilled malt vinegar. So pour that in. Now the reason I'm using this is because of the strength of it, and it's a 5% acidity. So you want at least 5%, and it's the strength of the vinegar along with the salt and the sugar that is the preservative for our chutney. A lot of regular malt vinegar is only about 4%. I don't know if you can see there's a fruit fly here. That's a sure indication that it's time for making chutney. So I'm now going to put this onto the hob, and off we'll go. So the chutney's heating up, the sugar is melted, or dissolved I should say, and this is really the start of the alchemy and the process. Yes, I've got a very shiny new preserving pan, and that's because I have just changed to an induction hob, and my old aluminium one that I've had for nearly 40 years didn't work anymore. But that's fine, that's absolutely fine. Just one word about a spoon if you're going to do lots of preserving. One that's shaped like this with an ear like that, which is really good for getting into the corner of the pan, is an absolute boon, and it will stop any catching on the bottom of the preserving pan, because this is a long boil. This is going to take about an hour. As you can see, it's getting hot now, but nothing much is happening. So I'm on a high heat. I'm going to go down to a medium heat. My hob goes up to 14. I'll probably go down to 8 and then maybe go down to 5 as it starts to thicken. And then I'll show you the results. So we're getting there. This is about 40 minutes in. I'm still cooking on number 10. I go from 0 to 14 on my hob, but 10 seems to be giving me the evaporation and a quickness of cook. New pan, new hob, it's all new to me. But that's getting on pretty nicely, and from now on it starts to get critical. From now on I need to get that spoon corner into the pan and just make sure that the chutney isn't sticking at the bottom. A sure sign that your chutney is nearly ready is when you give it a stir and you get thick globby bits coming up from the bottom and it's still a bit liquid on top. Just before you came back to me, I'd just done that, so it's not flobber-dobbering around so much. But if you're not used to cooking and heat, do have an oven glove on your hand because it really can spit a bit at this stage. But keep that stirred so that it doesn't stick at the bottom. And at this stage it's important to have your jars ready for the bottling. So the chutney's ready and I'm getting the jars out of the oven. Now these have been thoroughly washed and then they go into the oven at a low heat to sterilize. And the important thing is that they should be upside down on the wire shelf in the oven, not on a baking sheet, so that the water that will still be on the jars can evaporate and the jars will be perfect. Okay, here we are at long last. Our chutney's ready. And I just give that a stir around, then we're ready to bottle up. So let me get rid of that spoon just for now, and then using a clean Pyrex jug start loading the jars. Now take a bit of care with this because obviously the chutney is really hot, the jam jars are hot as well. But what you want to do is make sure that all the fruit, there's a lovely splodge just pointing you, all the fruit is under the kind of the goo, technical word, but that it's all packed down and you've got no air bubbles. We need air, preserves don't. They will harbour bacteria and it will cause the spoiling of them. So make sure you get that air out, and it's just worth having a good old prod around. So, and probably better with a metal spoon rather than a wooden spoon. My wooden spoons are all fairly ancient, and I would think that I know this is cleaner than my wooden spoon. So if I just turn that around so that I can get to the other jars and just get those filled up. Those sultanas have plumped up beautifully. I like things that plump up beautifully. And they will probably continue to absorb a bit of the liquid as the chutney matures. And I haven't warmed quite enough jars, so that's a big error on behalf of somebody who's pretending she's a professional. But there we are. I just filled the last one up. And I'll get that bottled up as quick as I can. Now, you've got to get the tops of your jars clean. If you don't, it just simply won't help. Now, I've got cook's fingers, but these jars are hot. The instant thing that you would do is reach for your dishcloth to do this, and of course that could have heaven knows how much grot on it and germs, so please use kitchen paper or a clean cloth of some sort, and just get the top of the jar as clean as you can. There we are. All of this seems really pedantic, but this is where preserving can go wrong if you don't take this amount of care at this stage. So get that cleaned up as much as you can. Now, bearing in mind that the jars are hot, you then just pop the lid on. I always just go around, pop them on. Now, I know those are new jars, so those lids are going to be fine. That's quite a new jar as well. That one I'm not so sure of, so I'm going to, before I did this, I checked it very thoroughly. If there is any rust on it, either on the rim or if this is at all damaged, don't use it. The reason being that the acid from the vinegar, that one's fine as well, will really could, if you keep the preserve for a couple of years, which they should keep very well for that time, it will just get in there and corrode, and that's another thing that could ruin your hard work. So I've got a clean tea towel so I can hold the jar and then tighten up those lids, and again you will need a good oven glove to do it, and don't use a tea towel. You know, chefs are the worst people for just grabbing a tea towel to get things out of the oven. It's not good, because if it's at all damp, the heat will go straight through that tea towel and you'll get burnt. I love these. They're made by Zeal, and they're the best oven gloves I've ever had. If you live in Orkney, go along to the Quernstone in Stromness. If you don't, look online. So all that squish underneath, I'm just going to move that over there. So make sure you pack your chutney down into the jars to get rid of any air bubbles. This autumn fruits chutney, that is fairly liquid at this stage, so that's absolutely fine. My green tomato chutney that I made also is quite watery. Here in Orkney, one thing you're absolutely assured of if you grow your own veg is green tomatoes, and luckily it's one of my favourite chutneys, so you know, I'm very happy to make that. This is the big jar that we've got on the go of green tomato chutney at the moment, and as you can see, as we're taking chutney out of it, I'm just scraping that down inside so that again that doesn't spoil. And this form of Le Parfait jar is brilliant, and especially if you want to give some chutney as a gift. The smaller versions, you know, are absolutely lovely. The one thing I would say is that once you've got the jars hot, you don't put them in the oven with the seal on, obviously, because that doesn't do the seal any good. But in order to get the seal easily onto the jar when it's hot, you need to soak that rubber seal in almost boiling water. And then once the jar is hot, you can put it on and then just clamp it shut. And you will get condensation inside the lid. Don't worry about that, because that's absolutely pure liquid and it will drop down into the preserve and be absorbed. So they can be quite difficult to open after a while, and you should just wiggle this around and that should make it easier. If they are really, really stuck, so you've taken this off and you really can't move that, and wiggling it doesn't make much difference, do try and ease either a very blunt knife or the handle of a spoon underneath that. Don't use a sharp knife, because you can ruin the seal. Yes, of course, you can buy those separately, and that's absolutely fine. So, with my green tomato chutney, I just want to show you this. This is 9 years old now, and after a demonstration where I showed this chutney, we were at dinner with some people a few weeks later, and they gave me this little jar of chutney that they had made with my green tomato chutney recipe, and you'll find that on my website rosemarymoon.com. And it was so sweet that somebody loved it so much they wanted to give me a jar of my recipe that they'd made to show me how well they had done. Now, just finally, I do want to say that a friend very kindly gave me this jar of chutney, which is a gooseberry chutney. It's only been made for 3 or 4 weeks. But I did say to her that we would eat it straight away because although it's nicely done with a good seal, this is how you would seal a jam or a marmalade. Not something with vinegar where that will evaporate. And already, although I've only had this for a couple of weeks, I can see that the vinegar is disappearing from the top of the jar of preserve. And so this really won't keep for very long. And if I just take that off and remove that, first of all, you don't need to use a wax disc. And actually that isn't strong enough. Although you might say, oh, that's wax paper, that should do the trick. It's not strong enough really to prevent the evaporation. And if you are absolutely stuck and you've got no jam jars, then okay, put this on and it will help a little bit, but make sure that it's really well pushed down all over the fruit. But if I just show you that, you can see that the fruit at the top is drying out because of that topping. So when you're making chutney, do use jars with lids. Make sure the lids are in good order, and make sure that they're well put on. I shall go back and just tighten these up. Sometimes as the jars then cool down, you get a little pop, which shows that you've got the seal there. And then probably tomorrow, when they're cool enough to handle, I'll give them a good old wash, and then I shall label them up. And always put what it is and the date that you made it, because then when you find a jar at the back of the cupboard, you know how old it is. And my labels all say Lunar Food, which was an idea of my husband, because our surname is Moon. So chutney making is the most enormous fun, whether you grow your own veg or you go out and buy the fruits and veg to make the chutneys with. But I always feel sorry for people if they make up a batch of chutney and they don't like it. If that should happen to you, and I don't think it will with my recipes, but you never know. People have loved these for, getting on for 20 years I've been showing people how to make chutney. If it should happen, just remember a spoonful or 2 or even 3 or 4 in a casserole or a stew is absolutely fantastic. Even in something like a shepherd's pie, it just works brilliantly. So that's it. I'll see you next time, and in the meantime, I hope you enjoy cooking as much as I do. Bye.